But let's go
It's true.
into the other side of the digital assets, or maybe what's known as
Sure.
cryptocurrency transactions.
Yes, and so this is really interesting, right? Because obviously where the market's at and where things are going. And I want to actually start with my own crypto story, right? So this is, I don't know, 2017 is, I think that was the year.
Yeah.
Everything was going crazy. My brother calls me up and he's like, Brett, you got to check this thing out. I'm like, what? I'm in real estate. What is this thing? He sits down, he walks me through it. I'm like, okay, let's go, right? And then I jump on the train here and not knowing a thing, feel like I was throwing darts, at a board. And we're all of a sudden things are, going pretty good. But guess what? Everything then crashed, right? And it was like, oh man, I wish we could have got out. Now, the same thing happened for an actual live deal right now. And this gentleman is in the tech sector in technology for 20 years and in Silicon Valley. And so I sat down and I met with he and his wife in the Bay Area just the last couple of weeks, and I asked him their story. I said, "Well, what'd you do here with when you had all this gain?" And his wife said, "Well, I actually didn't even know until he told me a couple of years after he'd been buying it." He goes, "Yeah, I've been buying it slowly. I was buying this thing called Ethereum, years ago." And I'm like, "Okay, and tell me more." And he's, "Well, I had a little bit of Bitcoin, but I thought Ethereum was the future." So I sit down with my wife, and it's like our anniversary dinner. He's like, "I have something to tell you," and she's like, "Wait. You're going to hit me with something crazy?" You're like, "No, I've been buying this thing called cryptocurrency. It's called Ethereum." She's like, "What are you talking about?" And this is like 6 years ago or so, or 5 years ago, something like that. And he goes, "Yeah, it's gone pretty well so far." And she's like, "Well, then sell it." And he's like, "Well, I think there's a future in this thing." And she's like, "What are you talking about? It's somewhere out in the universe. Like, we can make the money right now." And he's like, "Well, let me think about it." And so at that point, the value, I don't have the exact timeline, but it was around 100,000 that he had put into it. But the value was somewhere around that number, or he'd put in 20,000. The value was 100. Well, fast forward to the kind of like the peak, it's up to 6 million. I think this is around the 2017 range. And then I said, "Then what did you say?" And she said, "I told him to sell it all." And he said, "Well, I think there's a future in it." And there's always this song and dance here, right, back and forth. And he's like, "I don't know if we should sell it all," but he's like, "Look, we've always wanted to buy a house on Tahoe." He goes, "Why don't we sell and we'll go buy a nice house on Tahoe, do this or that." So he's like, "But give me a little bit of time. I'm going to figure out a way to defer the capital gains tax," because at this point their basis was 100,000 and the value is about 6 million. Well, guess what? He waited too long and then everything started to crash, right? So then he's like, "Gosh, I missed the boat." So about 50 days ago, he calls us up and says, "Hey, look, we got this thing called Ethereum and Bitcoin. And now the valuation is about 9.5 million. Our basis is about 100,000. He goes, "Would you come meet with me and sit down and walk through this?" So we talked with the attorneys, gone through it. I went down, sat with them, and I'm sitting with him. And he goes, "Well, can you give us some numbers?" And I go, "Well, based upon that number," he goes, "Wait. I go, "That's the number, right? 9.5." He goes, "Let me check." And he opens his phone up, he clicks on it, and he goes, "Well, actually, it's at 12.5 now." I'm like, "Wait, in just 2 weeks since you talked to me?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay, so what do you want to do?" He goes, "Well, we want to sell it, but we don't want to pay the tax. We want to defer the tax." "Okay, well, what's your challenge?" Well, his challenge was about 5 million of capital gains tax liability. So the question was simple. I said, I'll call him Mr. and Mrs. Ethereum. "Would you like to have 12 million minus some fees, or would you like to have 7 after tax?" They said 12. I said, "Well, what would that mean for you guys, right? Like, what's your income? What does this money mean to you?" "Well, we could retire." "Okay, what does that mean for? Well, we have 2 kids. We could travel. We could finally buy that house on Tahoe, right? We could do all of these things." And so really what hopefully your listeners are hearing here, it's the transformation that can happen. Right now, this 12 million's out in the Ethereum world somewhere, right? On the interweb, right?
Ethereum's hitting record high today, just so you know.
Okay, yeah, it might be 13 now that we
He
speak.
might be he
Okay?
might be up more.
Exactly. So I'm like, "Look, we can sell," and he, by the way, we can dollar cost average this too.
Yeah.
Because I go, "Look, why don't we just start with 3 million,
Yeah.
start with 1 million, whatever you want to start, and then if it goes up more, we'll just keep rolling it to the same trust." But really, what we focused on is what it could provide for people, and that's the transformation that this happens. What do they want to do? They want to buy cash flow producing real estate. They want to replace their income. Right? They want to diversify. They don't want to go through the big ups and downs, but also stay invested in Ethereum. So we're not taking that away. We're just taking some chips off the table as they feel, the timing is right. So hopefully that makes sense, Joe.